From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Colorado has been impacted severely by wildfires in recent years. And as climate change continues to intensify, the threat is growing. Colorado Senator John Hickenlooper, who's a Democrat, recently co-sponsored a sweeping new bill to expand and speed up wildfire prevention efforts across the country. It's called the Fix Our Forests Act. It calls for more funding for research to prevent wildfires, the creation of a central wildfire response center for the whole country, and the removal of more dead and diseased trees on federal land. It also calls for the time allowed to review or push back on these forest management projects to be much shorter.
The difference is it won't take 5 years or 8 years. People will be able to do it fast enough so that they can really respond to this tinderbox situation we find ourselves in most of the American West.
Some critics have taken issue with the bill. They say it would undermine environmental protections and could lead to more logging. So we asked the senator to talk about the bill, address some of that criticism, and talk about why this proposal makes sense now.
Well, I think that we are increasingly at risk. This incredible drought that almost every scientist believes to a large extent are the result of climate change, these extreme weather events that come from this extreme drought. Mm-hmm. We need to respond to the conditions in the forest that take this hotter, drier summer, and now we're seeing wildfires all year round. When I was governor, we saw them mostly just in the summer.
Right.
It was a season. We used to call it a season. And now we had the Marshall Fire, obviously, in the middle of the winter. We've got to address this. We need to take out and thin the forest. We need to get rid of the deadfall. We need to make sure that the forest condition is such that we will not get these mega fires that get super hot and literally can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough money to do everything.
Sure.
So where do we take the limited dollars we have and put them to the best use?
Well, one thing this bill would do is create a central wildfire response center for the entire country. How would that center respond more quickly to wildfire danger?
Well, we have many advantages now. We're launching thousands of satellites every year, and their ability to see fire when it starts, when it's first smoldering, is increasingly evident, and you can use artificial intelligence to get on top of that even better than we ever did before. That will all work better from having a central agency that's in charge of it and immediate connections in every state in the West.
Sure. Where would you like to see that center located? Colorado?
Well, probably in Lakewood. I think probably in Lakewood. I don't know. Maybe in Greeley.
Fair. Some environmental groups dislike a proposal in this bill that would shorten the amount of time they have to challenge a project, like a forest thinning project, to give one example. Currently, they have 6 years to challenge it. The bill cuts that window to about 6 months. How concerned are you, Senator, that moving more quickly could harm sensitive areas in western forests?
Well, I think moving more quickly is a consequence of the sense of urgency I feel with present conditions. And I feel the same urgency about climate change. Everything takes so long. If we want to build new transmission lines to make sure we get wind and solar energy from where it's generated to where it's actually consumed, to the cities, to build a transmission line takes 10 years. And a lot of these same kinds of traditional concerns are reflected in that. In this case, I think cutting it down to 6 months, again, people have to pay attention, but nowadays everyone's paying attention. It's not like it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago where this kind of an effort would take place off record. No one would know about it. Right. I think now we're at a point where we're all going to agree on these things, and we should be able to move pretty quickly. And if someone isn't there for the hearing, they're still going to be able to litigate. And I think if you look at some of the nonprofits, the environmental community that support this bill, recognize that it's not perfect. It's a bipartisan bill. I mean, I wouldn't mind having 2 or 3 years, but this was a compromise to get the bill done, and we all agreed that urgency was one of the methods by which we'd measure which changes to make. But we've got the Nature Conservancy, the Environmental Defense Fund, Audubon,
Okay.
National Wildlife Federation. These are big, sprawling nonprofits that represent millions and millions of Americans. And they feel that the timelines are sufficient for people to really deal with something if it's a problem.
Currently, a logging project that helps with wildfire prevention can be as large as 3,000 acres before it has to open to public comment and environmental review. The bill increases that threshold to 10,000 acres. What is the advantage of loosening that protection?
Well, this is one of the items that Alex Padilla, the senator from California, who's been my Democratic partner, I have Senator Curtis and Senator Sheehy from Montana, Curtis from Utah, were the Republican partners. But Padilla came up and they had an example in California where they had to go through the whole process 4 separate times to protect the same strip of forest because it was about 11,000 acres. So at 3,000 acres, they had one patch of 3,000, another patch of 3,000, another patch. And so they had to stand up and tear down and stand up and tear down all this bureaucratic machinery. Instead of one process, they had to do 4 processes. And he said, it's crazy. And explicit in this bill, it says this bill can only be used for environmental improvement, for environmental protection. And clear cutting is not environmental protection. So it is black and white that this is what this is for, is for wildfire protection and nothing else.
Well, briefly, Senator, on Sunday, we learned of an anti-Semitic attack in Boulder that targeted participants in a walk to raise awareness about Israeli hostages in Gaza. What do you want the community in Colorado, and specifically in Boulder, to know right now?
Well, our hearts are broken by the tragedy. These were people that believed in peace. They just wanted to get an exchange of hostages for both sides. And for that belief in peace and action, they were on the receiving end of Molotov cocktails and, ad hoc flamethrowers, using a weed killing machine to shoot fire at people. It's a situation that is appalling at every level, and it reflects the increasing amount of hate speech we see everywhere. And I think that we've got to restrict the hate speech to a certain extent so that we can, free speech is always going to be first and foremost in America, but urging people on to violent acts just isn't acceptable.
That's John Hickenlooper, Democratic Senator of Colorado. We'll put a link to more coverage of the forest bill he co-sponsored in our show notes and at kunc.org. We'll also have continuing coverage there on the response to the attack in Boulder. That's it today for In the NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.